Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for returning for another segment of Health Professional Radio. We'll be speaking with Dr. Eugene Chan in this segment. He's joining us here as chairman and co-founder of AbPro. AbPro is a company working to advance monoclonal antibodies to be used to treat COVID-19. He's joining us to discuss the importance of protecting the immunocompromised population amidst mutating COVID-19 variants. And he's also going to share some of the latest on the development of AbPro's infectious disease antibody treatment. It was demonstrated best-in-class efficacy against the multiple Omicron variants. Welcome to Health Professional Radio. Dr. Eugene Chan, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to meet you, Neil.
Well, I mentioned that you're joining us here as chairman and co-founder of AbPro. What are some of the challenges that the United States is going to face because of the so-called triple-demic?
So right now we're in an interesting phase of the pandemic for kind of interesting ways because you've got COVID, you've got now folks who are unmasked, and what you're seeing a return of RSV and also flu together with COVID, and so it puts us in a challenging situation. And so I think for the folks who haven't been exposed to, let's say, flu or RSV, some of these folks are actually getting hit harder, and I think it's people just need to be a little bit more careful in terms of sort of their daily interactions. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now in terms of increases in these infectious diseases.
Do you think there's a mindset among the general population that, well, if it's not COVID, it's not that serious?
It's quite the contrary. So what we are seeing is that for RSV, for this particular season, it's actually worse. So RSV is respiratory syncytial virus. And basically it impacts young kids. So it could be as, young as a newborn to, basically, in preschool or kindergarten age. So, and it could be worse than COVID in a lot of cases because essentially your airways get highly inflamed. And basically what we're seeing is, unfortunately, some kids are ending up in the hospital more than they should be because of, particularly for RSV this season. And Omicron is actually, basically Omicron as well as COVID has kind of gone almost a little bit less virulent and more infectious. But it's still very dangerous, obviously. So I think there's general misconceptions of sort of danger levels of the other stuff, which is flu and RSV. I think those are essentially equally as kind of challenging for our healthcare system.
Does being a child automatically place you in the immunocompromised population simply because immune system hasn't developed yet?
So when we talk about immunocompromised, particularly for our COVID program, we're talking about folks who are on chemotherapy, people who by genetic kind of disorder that they actually can't mount an immune response. And so these are quite different from sort of your regular newborn kind of children and whatnot. So there's kind of like what I call the immuno kind of naive, which is your newborn. And then there's your immunocompromised. The immunocompromised is either through sort of genetics or, through chemo treatment or something along those lines that you can't mount sort of an appropriate antibody response. And so for particularly for the immunocompromised, what we're seeing is that these individuals, unfortunately, they can't get the benefits of vaccines. So because, once you get immunized in a normal person, essentially you develop a pretty robust immune response. And so in some of these other folks, because of that particular issue, either by drug treatment or by some genetic defect, we're seeing these people basically need additional assistance in terms of monoclonal antibodies. And so basically prophylactic monoclonal antibodies like ours basically provide the ability to basically have that benefit of essentially like a vaccine, essentially without a vaccine.
So basically, this triple-demic is going to impact the general population, the immunocompromised, as you just described, schools and health systems in different ways based on what type of immunocompromised person is in those environments, correct?
That's correct.
As far as the efficacy of current COVID-19 treatments, vaccines, the antivirals, monoclonal antibodies that we talked about available, what about the challenges that they pose for the certain patient populations, just the COVID-19 treatments? Are they just as dangerous to the immunocompromised as any other treatment?
So COVID-19 is very dangerous to the immunocompromised, and because of the recent mutations and the new variants that have come out, it's actually rendered all the existing monoclonal antibody therapies to be ineffective. And so essentially right now we're actually down to vaccines, which, as I mentioned, it doesn't work on these immunocompromised individuals, and also Paxlovid. The Paxlovid is a small molecule, kind of oral inhibitor of COVID. And basically, fortunately, Paxlovid has not, basically been affected by these variants yet. And so it doesn't leave sort of the immunocompromised with too many lines of defense. And so the main premise of APRO's antibodies is essentially the ability to kind of act against these variants. And so we've seen that throughout even the past few months, there's been multiple new variants that have popped up. We've seen that the APRO antibodies have basically maintained their ability to be highly potent against these variants. And it kind of leaves our therapy really the only one that's out there that has activity and basically the ability to protect these immunocompromised individuals, which is really sort of one of the main missions of the company, really is how do we actually provide therapies to those who don't have it. And so it kind of fits neatly in terms of what our company is trying to do.
Briefly, how do these monoclonal antibodies work to treat the COVID-19 virus that's changing so rapidly and frequently? And then talk about your pipeline goals before you give us a website where we can learn more.
Definitely. Our antibodies for COVID-19, they basically target conserved regions of the spike protein, which basically don't change over time. And so we've been able to have the benefit of looking at sort of the thousands of sequences for many different variants of COVID using AI. And so we've created these algorithms to basically predict which sites in the spike protein is not going to change, and where if it changes enough, it's not going to be COVID anymore. And so essentially, we've been able to take some of these regions of the spike protein and target it using the antibody technology that we have within APRO. And that's basically how we've managed to stay on top of it, unlike the other companies.
And as far as your pipeline and your future goals?
Definitely. So APRO, the name of the company stands for Antibodies and Proteins. And we've been able to leverage the ability to make antibodies against the whole diverse set of targets for cancer. We have these bispecific antibodies for cancer, and also one for wet AMD, which is basically a degenerative eye condition, as well as COVID. So COVID is definitely sort of at the top of mind. And prior to COVID, basically, we had a pretty strong focus, and still do, in basically leveraging the antibody technology for cancer. And recently, we just announced a $1.75 billion deal with Celltrion, which basically is a co-development of our HER2 CD3 agent for basically treating breast cancer.
Eugene, if you'd give us a website where our listeners can learn more, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
So it's www.abpro.com. That's abpro.com.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and giving us this information. And hopefully you'll come back. 10 minutes is not a lot of time to cover such a vast topic, but we'd love to have you back.
Great. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Neil.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Eugene Chan. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.